Hi, Ben. Today we're diving into one of the most famous legal films, A Few Good Men. The movie revolves around a court martial case where two Marines are accused of murder. I'm really excited to discuss the legal aspects of this film. What did you think of it?
Hey, Anna, yes, I've watched it a couple of times. It's definitely one of the most well-known courtroom dramas. I really appreciated how it touches on military law, especially since we usually focus on civilian criminal law in law school. The movie gives us an inside look at a court martial, which is very different from what we see in civilian courts.
Exactly. The court martial system is so specific to military law. And that's one of the first things I noticed. In the film, the prosecution tries to make the case seem straightforward. But when you look at it legally, there are so many challenges related to jurisdiction and military hierarchy.
Definitely. The question of jurisdiction is a key point. In civilian courts, we know that criminal cases are handled by either state or federal courts, but in the military, crimes committed by service members are prosecuted under military law. In the case of A Few Good Men, the soldiers are put on trial in a military court because the alleged crime occurred on a military base.
Right. And what's interesting is how military law differs from regular criminal law. For example, the Marines' actions were initially seen as insubordination and disobeying orders, but they were accused of murder in a much more complicated legal environment. What's your take on the chain of command in this case?
Yeah. The chain of command is central to the entire plot. The defense attorney, played by Tom Cruise, argues that the two Marines, Lance Corporal Dawson and Private First Class Downey, were following orders when they carried out the action. The defense emphasizes that they were under duress and that their actions were a result of a command from a superior officer, Colonel Jessup. This raises the issue of command responsibility in military law, something that's not as clear cut in civilian criminal law.
That's a great point. It's actually related to the concept of orders in military law. In civilian courts, someone can't just claim they were following orders to justify a crime. But in military settings, there is a very specific relationship between soldiers and their commanding officers, which sometimes complicates legal responsibility. The idea of obedience to orders doesn't make it a free pass, but it definitely creates more layers of complexity.
Exactly. And that's what makes the court martial process so interesting. Unlike a civilian trial where due process is often very clear, military tribunals can have their own procedures, and there's this added weight of military discipline. That's why the prosecution's case focuses so much on showing that the orders were not justified and that they were given by someone who should have known better. Colonel Jessup.
Yes, Colonel Jessup is really the centerpiece of this case. The prosecutor argues that the two Marines couldn't have acted independently, they were just following orders. But the defense argues that the orders were illegal and that the men were essentially forced into committing the act under coercion. The key legal term here is duress, the idea that someone might commit a crime because they are threatened or pressured by someone in authority.
I agree. What I found particularly compelling in the film is how both sides use legal precedents. The prosecution argues that there is no justification for murder even under duress, while the defense focuses on the idea that military personnel must follow orders, and those orders must be lawful. This brings us to the concept of illegal orders, which is another significant issue.
Right, and that brings us to the ultimate question: what happens when an order is illegal? In the film, the defense attorney uncovers the idea that Jessup gave an order that was not just morally questionable, but legally invalid. That's why the court martial case ultimately hinges on the legality of the order and whether the defendants were truly following a lawful command.
And that's what makes the final confrontation so gripping. The famous line, "You can't handle the truth," is not just about a dramatic moment, it's about understanding the depth of legal responsibility within the military system. The key point is whether someone in a position of power can use their authority to justify illegal actions.
Absolutely. I love how the film shows the tension between moral duty and legal responsibility. In civilian court, the concept of moral responsibility is often tied to whether someone's actions were reasonable. But in the military, you can see how duty and discipline intersect with legality. The question is, can you blindly follow an order when it could lead to criminal actions?
And it's also about admissible evidence. The defense uses evidence of Jessup's previous behavior to support their argument, which is interesting because in military trials, not all evidence that might be admissible in a civilian court would be allowed in a court martial. For instance, Jessup's character and history of similar incidents might not even come up in a regular criminal trial, but in this military case, it's crucial.
Yeah, the rules of evidence can be very different. Military tribunals have their own set of rules, which means not all testimony or documentation is treated the same way as it would be in civilian courts. For example, a judge might allow evidence that would be ruled inadmissible in a civilian trial.
Exactly. And while we're on the subject, witness testimony plays a huge role in the film. For example, the prosecutor's witness, who initially provides the testimony that supports the idea that the two Marines were acting under orders, is later cross-examined by the defense. This highlights how testimony and credibility can shape a case. Legal practitioners always stress the importance of making sure witnesses are credible and that their statements hold up under questioning.
Yes. Cross-examination is such an important part of any trial, and in this case, it really helped the defense. The way the defense attorney carefully challenges the witness's credibility is crucial to the outcome. This is something that's common in both military and civilian courts. Credibility can make or break a case.
Definitely. So when we think about the movie as a whole, it's not just a courtroom drama. It's a fascinating exploration of how military law interacts with civilian legal principles. The film does a great job of showing the complexity of jurisdiction, evidence rules, due process, and even ethics in law.
Exactly. And it raises a lot of questions about legal ethics and how law should always be applied, whether in the military or in civilian life. The movie really makes us think about the limits of authority and the importance of accountability in the legal system.
Absolutely, and a great discussion. I'm sure we could keep talking about this for hours, but I think this gives us a good foundation for understanding the key legal concepts that the film raises.
Agreed. This is definitely one of those movies that's rich in legal issues, and it's a great way to dive deeper into the world of legal theory and practice. Thanks for the great conversation, Ben.
Thank you, Anna. I look forward to the next one.